Emily Carter had worked the Tuesday lunch shift enough times to know its rhythm by heart. The clatter of utensils against chipped ceramic plates, the hiss of bacon grease on the griddle, the low drone of tired voices discussing everything and nothing. The Greystone Diner was a tired place, its chrome trim dulled by time, its air heavy with the smell of burnt coffee and old dreams. Emily moved through it with the practiced grace of someone who survived by blending into the background, her brown hair pulled into a loose ponytail, her green hazel eyes focused but distant. She was wiping down a booth near the front window when the bell above the door chimed. An elderly woman stepped inside, leaning heavily on the arm of a man in a dark coat. The woman was frail, her ivory skin nearly translucent, blue veins threading beneath like cracked porcelain. Her companion, likely her son, had the weary posture of someone who had gone too long without sleep or peace. They paused at the entrance, the woman's gaze sweeping across the room, unfocused at first. Then it locked onto Emily. The sensation was immediate and physical, like walking into a shaft of cold air. Emily froze, cloth in one hand, a polite greeting forming on her lips. But before she could speak, the woman's trembling voice cut through the diner's hum. "It's you." Her companion shifted anxiously, attempting to guide her toward a booth, but the woman resisted, eyes never leaving Emily's face. "You have his eyes." The whisper was fragile yet unwavering, a thread pulled from somewhere deep in memory. Emily blinked, unsure she had heard correctly. His eyes. The words lingered, hanging in the space between them like mist. The man gently urged the woman into a booth. "Mom, sit down," he murmured. "I am sorry. Please ignore her." Emily nodded automatically, forcing a polite smile as she approached with two menus in hand. "What can I get for you today?" Her voice was steady, though her pulse raced. The woman ignored the menu. Her pale blue eyes, magnified by thick glasses, traced every feature of Emily's face. Her freckles, her hair, but always her eyes. "Green like Henry's after the rain," she whispered. Henry, a name Emily did not know. But before she could respond, the woman's hand shot forward and clasped Emily's wrist with surprising strength. "Ava, my sweet girl, you came back." The name struck harder than the grip itself. Ava. Emily felt her throat go dry. "I think you have me mistaken. My name is Emily." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "They said you were gone 10 years, but I knew. A grandmother always knows." Grandmother. The word sucked the air from the room. Customers fell silent, even the cook paused mid-motion. Emily tried gently to pull her arm free, but the woman held on as though letting go would make Emily vanish. Her son's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Mother, stop it, please, you are making a scene." Then everything changed. The woman's eyes widened, the joyous spark extinguished in an instant. Her breath caught, her lips parted in a soundless gasp. One hand clutched her chest. "Ava," she whispered one last time before her body crumpled. The sound of her collapse against the vinyl seat was soft yet final. A glass toppled and shattered on the tile floor. For a heartbeat, the entire diner was frozen. Then noise erupted. Someone shouted to call an ambulance. The man, her son, was already at her side, his voice raw with panic. "Mom, stay with me." Emily could not move. The echo of the name Ava reverberated inside her skull. Her wrist still tingled where the woman had touched her. Her breath came shallow, as if the walls had tilted and she was no longer standing on steady ground. The sirens came. Paramedics rushed in. The woman was lifted onto a stretcher, her pale hand dangling limply over the edge. As they carried her toward the door, her fingers brushed Emily's apron one last time. Then she was gone. The door closed. The noise died. Emily stood alone in the silence, now louder than any sound she had ever heard. The name she had never known lingered in the air like smoke. Ava. The sirens faded, but the echo of that name did not. Ava. It clung to Emily's mind like smoke, stubborn and impossible to shake. Mr. Henderson, the diner's owner, stood by the counter with a phone still trembling in his hand. "You should go home, Emily," he said gently. "You look pale." She wanted to protest, to insist she was fine, but the words crumbled before they left her lips. Her reflection in the streaked diner window said otherwise. Eyes wide, face drained of color, wrist faintly reddened where the old woman's fingers had clutched her. Outside, the afternoon sun felt wrong. Too bright, too warm compared to the cold weight dragging at her chest. She walked past the flickering neon sign of Greystone Diner across cracked sidewalks, through the familiar alley that smelled of damp cardboard and oil. Every step felt like she was walking away from the person she thought she was. Her apartment sat above a laundromat that always hummed with the sound of spinning machines. She climbed the narrow staircase, unlocked the chipped blue door, and stepped inside. The room greeted her with the usual smell of detergent and old wood, but tonight it felt foreign, as though someone else lived here and she was trespassing. She dropped her keys on the table. They clattered too loudly. "Ava," she said it out loud, testing the sound. "Ava." It felt strange in her mouth, like trying on a coat that did not belong to her. She had never heard anyone call her by that name, yet when the old woman said it, something inside her chest had lurched in a way she could not explain. She moved to the small bathroom. The mirror above the sink was slightly warped, but her reflection stared back clearly. Same dark hair, same freckled nose, same green hazel eyes. They were her eyes, and yet the woman in the diner had seen someone else in them. Emily exhaled slowly, lifting her left wrist. Pale skin, a faint crescent-shaped scar tucked just below the pulse point. She had always been told it was from the fire she barely remembered. Smoke, heat, red light flickering across walls. A lullaby in a voice she could not place. Then nothing. Her fingers traced the scar. Crescent moon. The same description the man had mentioned in the diner. My daughter had a scar, a small crescent shape on her left wrist. The room tilted for a heartbeat before she caught herself on the sink. Stop. She pressed her palms against the cool porcelain. You're being ridiculous. Just a coincidence, a mistake. A confused elderly woman, that is all. But the words rang hollow. She walked into the living room and pulled a worn cardboard box from beneath the bed. It was labeled in faded black ink, "Personal Effects, J. Carter." She had received it when she aged out of the foster system at 18. She hadn't opened it in years. Dust motes floated in the air as she lifted the lid. Inside were fragments of a borrowed life. School report cards with different handwriting for different guardians. A faded drawing she had made when she was 7. A plastic hospital bracelet with no name. Just Jane Doe. Age approximately 4 to 5. Found near Northwood fire site. Beneath it, wrapped in a scrap of soot-stained fabric, was the object she rarely touched. A small tarnished heart-shaped locket. She had tried to open it once when she was 15. It wouldn't move. Her hands shook as she held it now. The old woman's voice replayed in her mind. You kept it. You always kept it safe. Emily sat on the floor. Sunlight slipped through the blinds and lit the locket in her palm. She found a small pair of pliers in a drawer. Her breath came shallow. One gentle twist. A soft metallic click. The locket opened. Inside were 2 tiny circular photographs. On the left, a man with warm smile lines and forest green eyes. On the right, a young woman, laughing, holding a baby close to her chest. The baby's eyes were hazel green, just like hers, just like the photo the man in the diner had shown. Emily's vision blurred. A tear slipped down her cheek, landing softly on the metal. Who am I? The question was silent but deafening. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Emily Carter, a strained voice said, "This is St. Michael's Hospital. The elderly woman you saw earlier, Mrs. Evelyn Monroe. She has regained consciousness. She is asking for someone named Ava." Emily said nothing for a moment. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears. "I will come," she whispered. She ended the call. The locket lay open in her lap. The faces inside watched silently. Emily closed her eyes. The name she had never had was now calling her back. The sterile hallways of St. Michael's Hospital smelled of antiseptic and something heavier beneath it. Grief and fear and stale coffee. Emily's shoes squeaked softly against polished linoleum as she followed the signs to the cardiac care unit. The locket lay cold against her skin beneath her sweater. The name Ava pulsed inside her mind with every heartbeat. She paused outside the waiting room. Through the glass panel she could see him, the man from the diner, Thomas Monroe. He sat with his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped, his suit still wrinkled and tired-looking, his shoulders heavy with the kind of exhaustion sleep could never fix. His head was bowed, but the moment she stepped inside, his eyes lifted and found her. There was no confusion this time, only anger. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low and raw. "Haven't you done enough? You should leave." His words struck like ice. Emily tightened her grip on her bag. "I just wanted to see if she was all right, Mrs. Monroe." "I was worried." He stood. It wasn't a large movement, but it felt like a wall rising. Worried. People like you see an old, wealthy woman, and you smell opportunity. You think, if you play along with her delusions, you might get something out of it. Money, pity, fame. Whatever it is you're after, you're not getting it here. Emily blinked, stunned. "I don't want anything from you. I'm not pretending." She grabbed my arm. She called me that name, Ava. His jaw clenched at the sound of it. He took a step closer, voice a harsh whisper. "Do not say that name again." Silence fell between them, thick and dangerous. Emily swallowed. Then he sighed, rubbing his temples. "You don't understand," he muttered. "This has been happening for 10 years. She sees a girl with dark hair, the right height, the right eyes, and for a moment she believes it's her, my daughter, Ava. She sees ghosts." Emily's breath caught. "What happened to her?" she asked softly. He hesitated, his eyes distant. "We had an argument. She was 14, stubborn, just like her mother. She left the house. We thought she would come back after she cooled down. She never did. No trace, no note, nothing. Vanished." His voice broke slightly, but he recovered quickly, shutting the door behind his eyes again. "We searched. For months. Hired investigators. Filed reports. After a year, the police stopped calling. After 2, people stopped asking. But my mother, she never stopped waiting at the window." Emily's chest ached. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded stiffly, then looked at her with renewed hardness. "And you standing there with her eyes, it was cruel." Emily exhaled shakily. "I didn't ask for this. She found me. She said I have his eyes, Henry, and she called me Ava." His expression froze. Henry. The name hung there like a ghost, my father's name. Emily hesitated, then reached slowly into her bag. "I think you should see something." She pulled out the locket, still open. The tiny photographs glinted under the fluorescent light. Thomas didn't move at first. Then his eyes locked on the faces inside. His breath caught. The man, Henry Monroe. The woman, Clara. His wife, and the infant, Ava. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. "I've had it since I was a child. The social worker said it was found with me after a fire. I didn't know who they were until now." For a moment, Thomas was silent. The world around them felt suspended, like someone had drawn in a long breath and forgotten to exhale. Then, slowly, he shook his head. Number. This is not possible." He stepped back, pushing the locket away as if it burned him. "My daughter is gone. This is a trick, a mistake. You are not her." Emily's heart hammered. She didn't argue. Instead, with trembling fingers, she pushed up her sleeve. On her left wrist, pale against her skin, lay the small, crescent-shaped scar. Thomas stared, his face drained of color, his lips parted, his eyes fixed on the mark like it was a key turning in a lock he had welded shut years ago. "My daughter," he said hoarsely, "had a scar just like that, from a fall, when she was 12. Emily didn't move, didn't breathe. Thomas's hands trembled at his sides. For a moment, grief and disbelief warred in his expression. Then, like a door slamming shut, his features hardened. "Coincidence," he said, voice flat. "That's all this is, a cruel coincidence." He turned away. Emily stood alone in the waiting room, the locket heavy in her hand, the scar burning like a brand. For the first time in her life, the name Emily felt fragile, paper-thin, and beneath it, something older, something waiting to be spoken. Ava. The night pressed close against the windows of Emily's small apartment as she sat on the floor, legs folded beneath her, the cardboard box of her past open like a wound in front of her. The weight of what had happened at the hospital clung to her like smoke. Thomas Monroe had seen the locket. He had seen her scar. For a split second, his eyes had held something raw and unguarded. Then he had sealed it away behind disbelief. Coincidence. That was the word he chose. But the way his voice cracked had said something else. Emily didn't know what frightened her more, being wrong or being right. She sifted through the box slowly, as if the contents might burn her fingers. Old-school report cards bearing different last names. Dog-eared photographs of foster homes and birthday cakes with candles unlit. A faded hospital tag marked only with numbers. And beneath it all, the scrap of wool blanket charred at the edge. The one she had been found wrapped in. Scattered soot still clung to its threads. Her fingers brushed against something firm hidden at the very bottom. A plastic evidence pouch labeled County Social Services. Inside lay a faded incident report. Northwood warehouse fire. Unidentified female minor recovered. Age estimated 4 to 5. Severe smoke inhalation. No identifying documents. Emily traced the typed words, no identifying documents. But she knew that wasn't entirely true, because, lying on her chest, warm from her pulse, was the locket. She took it into her palm and opened it again. There they were, the man with the gentle eyes, the woman holding a baby, Henry and Clara Monroe, and the child they had loved, Ava. So why had no one come for her? Why had she become Emily Carter instead of Ava Monroe? The radiator clicked softly in the corner. The city outside buzzed with distant traffic. Emily closed her eyes, trying to summon memories, not thoughts. Sensations, flickers of something buried deep. Heat, red, smoke choking her lungs. A woman's voice singing softly, trembling with fear yet full of love. Run, baby, go, go. Her eyes snapped open, her breathing quickened. She pressed a hand to her chest. Enough. She needed answers, not ghosts. She pulled her phone from her pocket and scrolled through contacts until she found the name. Margaret Davis. The one foster mother who had ever felt like a real home. Someone who had kept her drawings on the fridge. Someone who had once whispered, "You're safe here." Her thumb hovered for a second, then she called. The line rang twice before a warm, surprised voice answered. "Emily? Dear, is everything all right?" Emily swallowed. "Mrs. Davis, I need to ask you something. About when I first came to you. About where I came from before that." There was a pause, soft, heavy. "I always knew this day would come," Margaret said gently. "Your file was different, almost empty. No last name until they gave you Carter. No birth certificate, no media coverage. No photo released to the public, asking if anyone knew who you were. That never happens with an unidentified child. Never. Unless someone didn't want you to be found." Emily's heart thudded in her ears. "Who handled my case?" A slow exhale crackled through the speaker. A woman named Linda Carver, senior case manager. She said there was a fire, that you had no memory of who you were. She told us not to ask questions, for your own good. Emily whispered, "For my own good, or for someone else's protection." Margaret didn't answer. After hanging up, Emily sat in silence. Her pulse pounded like a drumbeat in her throat. She lifted the locket again between her trembling fingers. This wasn't coincidence. This was deliberate. She packed the box carefully, its contents no longer just forgotten artifacts, but evidence. She placed the locket at the top. Then she stood. Her reflection in the darkened window looked unfamiliar. Not the quiet waitress who blended into corners. Someone else stared back. Someone with purpose. Someone who would no longer be erased. She grabbed her coat. She was going back to the hospital at dawn. Not to ask for permission, but to demand the truth. Because if she wasn't Emily Carter by birth, then she would find out who she really was, and why someone had tried so hard to make her disappear. Dawn crept reluctantly across the sky when Emily returned to St. Michael's Hospital. The city was still half asleep, wrapped in a hush that made everything feel fragile. She clutched the cardboard box of evidence to her chest as she walked through the automatic doors. The locket rested against her skin, warm like a heartbeat. Her steps echoed in the near-empty hallway. She was not sure what she was going to say, only that she had to say something. Thomas Monroe was already there. He stood in the hallway outside his mother's room, suit jacket discarded over a chair, eyes red from a night without sleep. He looked at her as if he had been expecting her, though his expression was unreadable. Tension, wariness, something almost like fear. "You came back," he said quietly. Emily nodded. She set the box on a nearby table. "I need to show you something, and you need to listen." He exhaled slowly as though bracing for impact. "This isn't the time. My mother is. I know where she is, and I know she asked for me, for Ava." His jaw tightened. The name landed like a blade. "Don't." She didn't back down. "I have proof. I don't know what it means yet, but I think you do." A silence stretched between them. The hum of a vending machine filled the background. Finally, Thomas gestured stiffly toward an empty consultation room. "Show me. 5 minutes. Then you leave." Inside the small room, under harsh overhead lighting, Emily opened the box. One by one, she laid out its contents on the metal table. Hospital tags, faded documents, the burned piece of blanket, and the locket. Thomas's eyes lingered on the locket, but he said nothing. "This isn't a trick," she said. "I didn't want any of this. I have no idea how it happened. I just know I grew up with no past. And your mother looked at me like I was hers. And now I know why." He stared at the items, lips pressed into a line. Then he reached into his wallet and pulled out a folded photograph. He placed it beside the locket. It was the same photograph he had shown her before. A smiling girl, 14, freckles, dark hair, green hazel eyes, Ava Monroe. Emily stood very still. The room felt smaller. She looked from the photo to the locket, to the scar on her wrist, to the man who refused to believe. Thomas looked up. His voice was quiet and tired. "Do you know how many times I've seen faces like yours? Girls at grocery stores, on street corners, in crowds. For a second I see her, for a second I believe, and then I'm wrong, again. And it feels like losing her all over." Emily swallowed. "I understand. But this isn't just a face. This is a locket your father gave to your mother. This is a scar you described before I said a word. This is a file with no birth certificate, no family, no identity. This isn't grief. This is evidence." Thomas closed his eyes. The lines on his face deepened. "You think I haven't imagined this exact moment? That she walks back in one day? That it was all some terrible mistake?" He shook his head. "Hope is worse than pain. Pain eventually settles. Hope poisons you. It keeps you from healing." The door opened. A man stepped inside, tall, gray at the temples, a face worn by truth and failure in equal parts. His voice was gravel and familiarity. "Thomas." Thomas straightened as though pulled upward by invisible thread. "Sam Hale." The name carried weight in the room. Samuel Hale nodded once, eyes sharp. Private investigator, the one who had spent years searching for Ava after the police stopped. The one who never found her. "You called me Thomas, said it wasn't over," he said simply. Thomas gestured toward Emily without looking at her. "This is her, the girl from the diner." Sam turned his gaze toward Emily. It was not cruel or disbelieving, just observant, measuring. He saw the box, the locket, the scar. He stepped closer. Emily held his gaze. "Tell me," he said. So she did. She told him about the diner, about the collapse, about the locket, the scar, the file, Margaret Davis, the absence of her past. He listened without interrupting, his eyes narrowing at details. When she finished, silence settled heavily. Sam finally spoke. "I want her file, all of it. Social services, hospital records, fire reports, and I want to see the intake documents from the Northwood warehouse fire. The year your daughter vanished." Thomas hesitated, then nodded slowly. And Sam added one name, Linda Carver. Thomas's breath caught. Emily looked between them. "You know her?" Thomas's voice was a whisper. "She handled Ava's case. She was the last person to see her file before it disappeared." Sam's eyes hardened. "Then that is where we start." Emily let out a breath she did not know she was holding. For the first time since hearing that name, she no longer felt alone. The investigation had begun. St. Michael's Hospital was quieter in the early hours of the morning, but Emily could feel the air shifting around her, no longer heavy with disbelief, but with something far more dangerous. Possibility. Sam Hale stood beside the small consultation table, arms folded, gaze fixed on the burned blanket and faded report, like a general studying a battle map. Thomas Monroe leaned against the wall, silent, as if one wrong word might cause his world to shatter again. "We start with records," Sam said. "Not guesses, not hope, facts." By noon, they were at the County Social Services Building, an aging structure of beige brick that smelled faintly of old paper and bleach. Emily walked between the two men, feeling like a ghost trespassing in a place where her life should have been written down clearly, but wasn't. The receptionist greeted them politely before her smile faded at the mention of Linda Carver. "I'm sorry, but Ms. Carver retired 3 years ago," she said. "Her personnel file is restricted, and any foster case older than 10 years is archived and sealed, unless accessed by a legal guardian or court order." Sam leaned forward just slightly. "Then get me the director." His tone wasn't loud, but it carried weight, the kind that came from years of being ignored and refusing to stay quiet. Minutes later, they were in a cramped office with file cabinets lining every wall. The current director, a sharp-eyed woman named Diane Walsh, sat behind the desk. She looked at the evidence on the table, then at Emily. "You're saying this girl is Ava Monroe, the missing child from 2015? She asked Thomas directly. Thomas didn't answer. He looked at Emily. Not a stranger now, not yet family. Something in between. "We don't know," he said. "That's why we're here." Ms. Walsh exhaled. "I worked under Linda Carver. She was strict, but good at her job, efficient. But near the end, something changed. She became secretive, paranoid." Sam nodded. "We need the Northwood fire intake file, the original one, not the amended copy." Walsh hesitated. "That file is sealed." "Then unseal it." "On what grounds?" Emily spoke before the men could. "On the grounds that I might be her, and if I am, then someone erased me." The silence that followed felt like a held breath. Walsh finally nodded. "I'll see what I can do." It took 2 hours of signatures, phone calls, and hushed conversations behind closed doors. Finally, a metal box was brought in. Inside lay files that smelled of dust and time. Walsh unlocked it. Sam reached in first. Case file, Jane Doe. Intake date, 3 days after Ava Monroe disappeared. He flipped it open. The first page matched the copy Emily had seen before. But beneath it, clipped to the corner, was the original intake slip, the one no one was meant to see. The line for age read, approximately, 13 to 14. Then overwritten in darker ink, approximately, 4 to 5. Next to the correction was a signature, Linda Carver. Sam's jaw tightened. He continued flipping pages. Hospital notes. A brief psychiatric evaluation. Child unresponsive. Disoriented. No speech. Possible trauma-induced amnesia. Blood type O negative. Emily's heart pounded. "That's my blood type." Thomas closed his eyes like the world tilted beneath him. Walsh looked pale. This looks like a falsification." "No," Sam said softly. "This is a cover-up." They left with scanned copies of every document. In the parking lot, afternoon sunlight glinted off car windshields. Emily leaned against a railing, clutching the locket through her shirt. "I was never 4, she whispered. "I was 14. And someone decided that I would be better off forgotten." Sam looked at her. "This isn't the end. This is the beginning. We find Carver. We make her talk." Emily hesitated. "I know someone who might know where she is." Thomas lifted his head. "Who?" "A former foster mother, Margaret Davis. She said Carver handled everything. She might know more." Minutes later, Emily dialed the number. The phone rang once, twice. Then, a familiar voice answered. "Emily, dear, are you all right?" Emily swallowed. "Mrs. Davis, I need to ask you something else. Do you know where Linda Carver is now?" There was a long pause. Then, "She lives in Pleasant Hills Retirement Community, room 312. But Emily, be careful. She never wanted this truth to come out. Emily ended the call. Her hand trembled slightly. Thomas stepped closer. Are you sure about this? No, she said honestly, but I need to know who decided my life for me. Sam watched her with quiet approval. Then let's go. They walked toward the car. Emily glanced back once at the social services building. For years, it had defined her existence with a single sentence. Unknown child, no family. Now, she knew that was a lie, and she was ready to tear it apart. The elevator ride to the third floor of St. Michael's felt longer than it should have. Emily stood beside Thomas in silence, the air between them thick with unspoken questions. The hospital lights flickered faintly as the doors slid open. A nurse passed by, murmuring something into a clipboard. Machines beeped softly somewhere down the hall. Everything looked the same as before, except nothing was. They stopped outside room 314, Evelyn Monroe's room. Thomas paused with his hand on the doorframe. His jaw was tight, but his voice had softened. She's awake, but she's weak. You don't have to come in. Yes, I do, Emily said. He opened the door. Evelyn lay propped against white pillows, skin pale but eyes open and alert. Those blue eyes drifted first to Thomas, then past him to Emily. For a moment they stared without speaking. Then Evelyn's lips trembled. Ava. It was not a question, it was a prayer breathed back to life. Thomas stepped forward quickly. Mom, please, we don't know anything for certain. But Evelyn didn't look at him. She reached out a frail hand toward Emily, the way one might reach for sunlight after a long storm. Emily hesitated only a second before crossing the room. The moment their hands touched, a soft sound escaped Evelyn's lips like a release of 10 years of grief. My girl, she whispered. I knew you would find your way home. Emily's throat tightened painfully. I don't remember, she said honestly. I don't know if I'm her. Evelyn brushed trembling fingers against Emily's cheek. But your heart does. Hearts remember what minds forget. Thomas stood rigid, arms crossed, but his resolve was starting to shake. He looked at his mother's weak but radiant smile, at the girl who looked so much like his daughter, at the silver locket now resting openly on Emily's chest. Evelyn's voice broke through the silence again. Do you still have it? She asked softly. The locket, your grandfather's. Emily nodded and carefully unfastened the chain, placing the locket in the older woman's hands. Evelyn held it as though it were a sacred relic. She opened it with familiar ease and her breath hitched. Henry and Clara, you kept them safe. Her eyes glistened as she gazed upon the tiny faces inside. Tears slipped over wrinkles carved by waiting. She looked at Thomas. Show her. Thomas hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. He handed it to Emily. A teenage girl smiling freely, freckles across her cheeks, a braid over one shoulder. Ava Monroe at 14. Emily stared. The shape of the jawline, the curve of the eyebrows, the eyes. It was like looking through a mirror blurred by time. Her fingers trembled around the photograph. Thomas's voice was low, rough. The last time I saw her was the night she disappeared. We argued about her future. She ran out. I let her go. I thought she'd be back by morning. He swallowed hard. She never came back. Evelyn looked at her son with sorrow and forgiveness mingling in her eyes. We lost her because we held too tight. And now fate brings her back, and still you push her away. Thomas looked at Emily, at the locket, then at her wrist where the faint crescent scar caught the hospital light. For the first time, his voice cracked. What if I believe and I'm wrong? Emily met his eyes. What if you're right? A knock on the door cut through the moment. A young nurse peeked in, apologetic. Visiting time is almost over. Thomas nodded but didn't move. Evelyn gently pressed the locket back into Emily's hand, closing her fingers around it. Go rest, her grandmother whispered. Come back tomorrow. Bring the truth with you. Emily stepped back but did not let go of Evelyn's hand until she had to. Outside the room, Thomas leaned against the wall, rubbing his temples. He looked older than he had that morning. She can't survive another disappointment, he said quietly. Neither can I, Emily replied. Sam Hale appeared at the end of the hallway, his expression unreadable. He approached, hands in his coat pockets. "Finch contacted me," he said to Thomas. "He has the preliminary results of what you asked for, and he found Linda Carver." Thomas's eyes sharpened. "Where?" "Pleasant Hills Retirement Community, upstate. She's agreed to talk." Emily held the locket tightly. Evelyn believed with her heart. Now it was time for the truth to follow. Thomas nodded slowly. "Then we go." Emily nodded too, because if blood remembered and hearts recognized, the mind deserved answers, no matter how much they hurt. Pleasant Hills Retirement Community sat on the edge of a quiet town, where trees bent in the wind like they were tired of standing. The building itself was ordinary, brick walls, faded blue awnings, white railings. But as Emily stood in front of it, her pulse quickened. Somewhere inside lived the woman who had signed away her name, her past, her entire life. Thomas stood beside her, shoulders stiff, eyes unreadable. Sam Hale was already at the entrance, speaking to the receptionist. He carried no badge, no authority, except the weight of truth and the years of obsession he had buried in old case files. "Room 312, Mrs. Linda Carver," the receptionist finally said. She looked from Sam to Emily with quiet curiosity. "She's lucid most days, but she startles easily." They walked down a hallway lined with muted floral wallpaper and framed paintings of places that felt almost real. Emily's heartbeat echoed in her ears. She felt Thomas glancing at her, but neither spoke. Sam stopped outside the door to room 312 and knocked twice, gentle but firm. A reedy voice answered from inside. "Come in." They stepped into a small sunlit room. Linda Carver sat in an armchair by the window, a blanket over her knees. She was thinner than Emily imagined, her silver hair pulled back neatly, her glasses hanging from a thin chain. At first glance, she looked harmless, like someone's grandmother. But as her eyes lifted and met Emily's, something flickered behind them. Recognition, dread, guilt. Linda gripped the armrests as if bracing for impact. "You," her voice trembled. "I knew this day would come." Thomas stepped forward. "You know who she is." Linda swallowed, lips pressed tight. "Yes." Sam pulled a chair opposite her. "Then tell us." Linda's gaze drifted to Emily's face, lingering on her eyes, then to the faint scar on her wrist. She closed her eyes, as if the sight burned. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. "I tried to protect you." "Protect me?" Emily asked, her voice quiet but sharp. "By erasing me." Linda's hands twisted the fabric of the blanket. 10 years ago, when they brought you from the fire in Northwood, you were disoriented. You couldn't speak, you didn't remember your name. The report said you were around 14, but then, the missing person flyer came across my desk. Ava Monroe, 14, hazel green eyes, crescent scar. I knew. "So why didn't you return her?" Thomas's voice shook with restrained rage. Linda looked at him, tears forming. "Because of Martin Cross, my supervisor. He said it would destroy the department. Another failure. Another headline. He said your family was powerful. You'd blame us, sue us, and then he saw another file. A girl named Emily Carter, 4 years old, died of pneumonia in one of our care homes, but no one had filed it yet. On paper, she was still alive in the system." Emily's breath caught. "You gave me a dead child's name." Linda nodded slowly. "We altered your file, changed your age, gave you Emily's identity. Buried Ava's. No press release, no public search. We sealed the intake file, and you became no one." Thomas clenched his fists. "You let us think she was dead. You let my mother wait by the window every day for 10 years. Linda's voice broke. "I was a coward. I told myself I was giving her a chance at a new life. But I was just scared." She covered her face with her hands. "I am so sorry." Sam leaned forward quietly. "Why are you telling us this now?" Linda lowered her hands. "Because I have seen her face every night for 10 years. Because I know what I did was unforgivable. Because when I saw the obituary for Martin Cross 5 years ago, I thought maybe one day I could make it right. Even if it cost me everything." Silence settled heavy in the room. Thomas looked at Emily. His voice was softer now. "We'll need a written statement, with dates, names, every detail." Linda nodded. "I will. I have my notes, journals. I kept everything. I knew this was coming. Emily stepped forward. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with something fiercer, resolve. Why me, she asked. Why did you choose me? Linda looked at her with hollow eyes. Because you survived, because you were strong, and because he said no one would come for you. Thomas turned away, jaw tight, fighting tears he wouldn't let fall. Emily stared at the woman who took her name, took her family, yet also, unintentionally, gave her life. She didn't say she forgave her, she only said, tell the truth, all of it. Linda nodded slowly. I will. Outside, the sky was overcast. As they walked to the car, Thomas spoke without looking at her. DNA test. Legal process. This isn't over. Emily clutched the locket. No, she said, but for the first time, it's beginning. The past had spoken. Now the future waited. The Peterson family house stood quiet against the twilight, its windows glowing faintly like tired eyes refusing sleep. Inside, the air felt heavy with anticipation. Thomas paced the length of the living room while Emily sat on the edge of the couch, the silver locket held tightly in her hand. Rain tapped against the window panes, soft and persistent, like a reminder that time was still moving even when the world felt paused. Sam Hale arrived just after nightfall, a stack of folders under his arm. His coat was soaked from the rain, but his expression was dry, sharp, all business. He set the files on the oak coffee table. These are the documents from Linda Carver, her journals, her notes, copies of the altered report. It's everything. Thomas stopped pacing. Does it prove she's Ava? Sam nodded. She kept records of the falsified ages, the intake report from the Northwood fire, the death file of the real Emily Carter. She documented every step of the cover-up, names, dates, signatures. Emily leaned forward. And my file. Sam opened the first folder. Inside was a photocopy of an incident report. Warehouse fire, 1 female survivor, estimated age 14, severe smoke inhalation, memory loss. He placed another paper next to it, handwritten corrections, age changed to approximately 4 to 5. Thomas's jaw tightened, and Martin Cross signed off on this. Sam pointed to the bottom, his signature, and Linda's initial beside it. Walter stepped into the room quietly. He had been upstairs, checking on his mother. His face was pale but composed. Brenda's awake but weak. She keeps asking if Ava is staying. Emily hesitated. I don't know if I even know who Ava is. I don't remember being her. Walter sat down across from her. His eyes, weary and filled with regret, met hers. Memory or not, you are her. You are my daughter. Silence stretched, fragile but full. Sam continued. I've contacted a lab. We'll rush the DNA test. It's just a formality now. But the law needs proof, not belief. Thomas looked at Emily. We also need to prepare for the legal side. Birth certificate changes, identity restoration, and a formal statement from Linda. And the state. Emily asked quietly. What happens to her? Sam exhaled slowly. She'll face charges. Falsifying state records, child identity fraud, obstruction of a missing person investigation. But given her cooperation, age, and health, sentencing may be lenient. The courts will decide. Emily nodded, but her fingers dug into the locket. In her mind, 2 lives pressed together like pages stuck by tears. One life was filled with coffee stains, apartment walls, and loneliness. The other was a ghost of a past she couldn't touch. Thomas rested a hand on the table, close but not touching hers. We're not asking you to choose tonight. But this, he gestured to the files. This proves what we already know. What do we do now? Emily whispered. Walter answered softly. Now we tell the rest of the family. And the police. Before the story breaks without us. Brenda's weak voice drifted from the top of the stairs. Tell who they turned. She stood there, frail in her robe, Thomas beside her with one hand under her arm. But her eyes were clear, alert. She looked down at Emily with a hope too fragile to speak aloud. Walter went to her quickly. Mom, you should be resting. I've rested enough, she murmured. Is it true? Emily rose slowly, heart pounding. She didn't know how to answer with certainty. but she stepped forward anyway. Brenda reached out a trembling hand, and Emily took it. "It's true," Emily said softly, "but I don't know how to be her yet." Brenda smiled, tears sliding down her cheeks. "You don't have to be her. Just be here." Rain pressed harder against the windows. The files lay open on the coffee table, the truth exposed in black ink on white paper. Names that had been buried were now unearthed. Ava Monroe, Jessica Morgan, Emily Carter. All of them leading to one girl standing in a living room, holding her grandmother's hand. Sam closed the final folder. "Tomorrow we take this to the authorities." Thomas nodded. Walter looked at his daughter and didn't look away. Emily closed her fingers around the locket. For the first time, the truth didn't feel like a storm. It felt like a door, and it was opening. The next morning arrived gray and heavy, as though the sky itself knew that truth was about to be tested. Emily sat in the passenger seat of Thomas's car, silent as the world blurred past her window. They were headed to the State Forensic Lab in Brookfield, where a DNA sample would be taken and compared with hers. Thomas's hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, but his voice when he finally spoke was soft. "You don't have to be afraid of the truth," he said. Emily didn't look at him. "I'm not afraid of the truth. I'm afraid of what it will take from me." He had no answer to that. At the lab, fluorescent lights hummed overhead while a technician swabbed the inside of Emily's cheek with a sterile cotton applicator. Another swab was taken from Walter, who sat nearby, rigid as stone. Neither spoke. The test would take 48 hours to produce results, but already the silence between them said what words could not. Both already knew the answer. Outside, Emily stood in the chilled air, arms wrapped around herself. Walter approached slowly. "I know I failed you," he said quietly. "I failed Jenny. I failed your mother. For years I buried her memory because it hurt too much to breathe. But if you let me, I want to make this right." She met his eyes, and in that moment she saw not the man who accused her in the hospital, but a father, flawed, broken, trying. "I don't know how to be your daughter," she said. "You don't have to know. Just give me the chance to be your father." Later that afternoon at the county police department, Sam Hale laid Linda Carver's journals and the altered social service reports before a detective. Statements were recorded, official reports were filed, warrants for archived records were issued. Linda Carver herself walked through the station doors, escorted by her own trembling conscience. She gave her statement in full, every detail, every lie, every signature. She didn't ask for forgiveness, she only asked for the truth to be written down correctly, at last. A press embargo was placed on the case, but the whispers had already begun. A missing girl, a stolen identity, a family divided by a decade of silence. At home, Brenda waited in the armchair by the window, her hands clasped in her lap like someone holding on to prayer. When Emily entered, Brenda didn't rise. She simply opened her arms. Emily hesitated, then stepped forward. She knelt and laid her head against her grandmother's chest. Brenda stroked her hair like she was smoothing out the wrinkles of time. "My sweet girl," she whispered, "you don't have to remember everything. Just remember you are loved." That night, Emily lay awake in her childhood bedroom, a room she didn't recognize, but one that somehow whispered her name. On the walls were framed paintings, sketches, photographs of a girl laughing in sunlight. A girl with her face. She traced her fingers along the windowsill, where faint scratches spelled initials, A.M., Ava Monroe. Her past was here, but her heart still lived in the small apartment above a laundromat, in the quiet hum of a diner, in coffee cups and charcoal drawings, and the smell of rain on pavement. She whispered into the darkness. "Who am I now?" Down the hall, Thomas sat at the kitchen table, staring at the DNA consent forms. Walter stood by the sink, pouring 2 cups of coffee, hands shaking. They spoke in low voices. "What if she never forgives us?" Thomas asked. Walter stared into his cup. "Then, at least she'll know we didn't lie anymore." Outside, wind pressed against the windows like invisible hands. Inside, the old house breathed with new life and old pain. 2 days later, the phone rang. "The DNA results are in," the voice said. Walter answered. His voice cracked on the first word. Emily stood beside him, her locket warm in her palm. The silence that followed felt endless. Then came 3 words that changed everything. "It's a match." Walter closed his eyes, shoulders shaking with a sound that was not quite a sob. Brenda, hearing from the stairwell, pressed a hand to her chest and whispered a prayer. Emily didn't cry. She only breathed. For the first time, it didn't hurt. She was Ava. She was Jessica. She was Emily. And all of them were real. The reckoning had come. Now came the rebuilding. The news of the DNA results traveled faster than anyone expected. Within 24 hours, distant relatives were calling, old friends were whispering, and reporters were leaving voicemails on the Peterson house landline. The small town that once mourned a missing girl now held its breath for her return. Emily, or Ava, depending on who spoke her name, found herself caught in a strange space between gratitude and grief. She moved into the spare room next to Brenda's. It had been cleaned, repainted in soft cream tones, a faded quilt folded neatly on the bed. It wasn't hers. Nothing here was. Yet Brenda stood in the doorway that first evening, smiling through tears, and said, "Welcome home." Home was quiet, too quiet. Emily missed the hiss of the espresso machine at the diner. She missed the sound of washing machines downstairs in the laundromat where she had fallen asleep more than once to their rhythm. But at night here she heard whispers, unfamiliar creaks in old floorboards, and the pulse of her own heart reminding her she was living someone else's paused life. Thomas tried to help her settle. He made lists on yellow notepads. Things to process legal documents, identity restoration, therapy appointments. He kept his voice steady, but his eyes carried the weight of a brother who remembered her and a man who feared losing her again. Walter was different. He hovered at a distance, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. Each morning he would place a cup of tea outside her bedroom door, just like he used to when she was a child. He never said anything. She never asked him to stop. Neither of them knew how to start over. Brenda was the bridge. She told stories at breakfast, reminding Emily of birthdays she no longer remembered, and songs her mother used to sing. Sometimes Emily laughed. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she felt nothing at all, and that frightened her most. As the days passed, reality seeped in. Reporters began circling the neighborhood. A news van parked across the street twice. Walter closed the curtains and told them to go away. But the world wanted the miracle story of the girl who came back from the dead. Emily didn't want to be a miracle. One afternoon, she ventured into the attic. Dust danced in the slivers of light from the small round window. Covered easels stood like monuments to a life paused. She pulled back a sheet. A painting of a girl standing by a lake looked back at her. Brushstrokes full of longing. The signature in the corner read, A.M. Her fingers tingled. She remembered nothing about painting it, yet her hand knew the curve of the brush handle. The ghosts of muscle memory prickled along her arm. She set the painting aside and searched the room until she found a small wooden box. Inside were charcoal sticks, dried paint tubes, a sketchbook with her name Ava written on the inside cover. The page beneath was blank. She closed it. That night, Emily sat beside Brenda in the living room. Rain pattered gently against the windows. Brenda held her hand like she used to hold a small child's. "You don't have to remember everything," Brenda said quietly. "Memories will come when they're ready. But love is still here. Love remembers, even when the mind does not." Emily leaned her head on Brenda's shoulder for the first time. It felt both foreign and familiar. Downstairs, Walter sat at the dining table with Thomas and Sam Hale. Papers lay scattered, legal forms, court documents, Linda Carver's written confession. They spoke in hushed voices. "We'll have to go to court," Thomas said, "to restore her birth certificate, change her legal name back." Sam nodded, "And Linda will be called to testify. It could become public." Walter swallowed, and Emily, overhearing from the stairs, said softly, "Ava." They turned. "My name," she said quietly, "my legal name at least." Walter nodded slowly. "Do you want us to call you that?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not yet. I don't know who Ava is. I'm not just her, but I'm not just Jessica either." Thomas leaned forward. Then what do you want to be called? She looked at the locket around her neck, then at her grandmother, then at her father. Call me Eve, she said finally. It was her, and it was new, a beginning, born from endings. Brenda smiled with tears in her eyes. Eve. Walter's voice broke softly as he repeated it. Eve. The storm outside quieted. Inside the old house something shifted. Not healed, not fixed, but aligned. Eve stood there in the doorway between who she was and who she could become. For the first time, she did not feel like a ghost. She felt real. She felt seen. Morning sunlight spilled across the kitchen as Eve stood quietly by the window, watching dew glisten on the garden beyond. The Peterson house, which once felt like a museum of someone else's memories, was slowly becoming something else. Not quite home, not yet, but no longer a stranger's story either. Walter sat at the table reading legal documents, his glasses low on his nose, a fresh cup of tea steaming beside him. Brenda dozed gently in an armchair, a quilt across her lap. And Thomas leaned against the counter, arms folded, waiting for Eve to speak. She held a stack of envelopes in her hands, official ones, court notices, documentation for identity restoration, a pending date for legal hearing. One line stood out in bold across the top of the most recent form. Petition for name correction. They were asking her to choose Jennifer, Ava, Jessica, Emily, or something else. I don't want to erase either life, she said softly. I don't want to forget the girl who worked in a diner, or the child who painted lakes in this house. Thomas nodded slowly. Then don't. Keep both. Walter put down the papers. His voice was careful, as though each word could unravel everything. What name feels like you? Eve hesitated. Her fingers brushed the locket at her throat. The cool metal was warm from her skin. I want Eva Morgan, she said finally. Eva, for all that, began again. Morgan, because she was real too. A silence followed, not empty, full. Brenda opened her eyes and whispered with a smile, Eva. Walter repeated it once under his breath as if testing it. Eva. Thomas gave a small nod of approval. It was new but familiar, past and present stitched carefully into one. That afternoon they drove to the courthouse. The sky was pale blue, brushed with white clouds. Sam Hale met them at the steps holding a leather folder. Inside were Linda Carver's statements, the DNA results, and the petition for legal reinstatement. In the courtroom, the air was cool and formal. Judge Harper, an older woman with sharp eyes and steady composure, sat above them. She read through the petition silently. Then she looked directly at Eve. Do you understand the legal implications of this change? She asked gently. Your identity as Jessica Morgan will remain on record as an alias. Your birth identity as Ava Monroe will be restored. And you wish to be recognized moving forward as Eva Morgan Monroe. Yes, Eve said, her voice firm and calm. That is my choice. Judge Harper nodded once, then addressed the courtroom. Given the DNA evidence, the supporting testimony, and the misconduct admitted by former social worker Linda Carver, this court rules in favor of full legal restoration of identity. As of today, Ava Monroe is legally recognized, preferred legal name, Eva Morgan Monroe. Motion granted. Walter's breath shuddered out of him. Brenda wept silently. Thomas closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them, clear and steady. Sam exhaled as if releasing a decade of held breath. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited, but no one spoke to them. Walter placed a protective arm around Brenda as Thomas guided her to the car. Sam walked beside Eve, but said nothing. It wasn't until they reached the top of the courthouse steps that Eve paused. The breeze lifted her hair. For a moment, she looked back at the heavy doors they had just walked through. Her life had been rewritten once without her consent. Today she had written it herself. In the following weeks, the world moved forward. The news stories faded. Linda Carver's trial was set for a later date. Sam Hale returned to his quiet home, full of old case files, and for the first time in 10 years closed the Peterson folder. Eve stayed, not because she felt she owed them, but because for the first time, the house no longer felt like an empty frame around a missing picture. She helped Brenda plant lavender in the garden. She shared silent breakfasts with Walter, who tried but failed to hide the way he looked at her like a miracle he didn't deserve. And some nights she found Thomas in the attic, sorting through old paintings with her initials in the corner. She began painting again, slowly, hesitantly. At first, the lines were shaky, then stronger. Colors returned. She painted the diner lights, the laundromat window rain patterns, the Peterson lake, and always, a face in the reflection of the water, hers. One evening she stood before a blank canvas in the attic. Walter climbed the stairs quietly. "What will you paint next?" he asked. She dipped her brush in a pale shade of gold. "Home," she said, not the place she found, but the one she was creating. Eva Morgan Monroe, at last. Real, whole, home.